Chapter 39. Of Lights and of Shadows, the Parting of Worlds. What Hurstwood got as the result of the determination was more self-assurance that each particular day was not the day. At the same time, Carrie passed through 30 days of mental distress. Her need of clothes, to say nothing of her desire for ornaments, grew rapidly as the fact that developed that for all her work she was not to have them. The sympathy she felt for Hurstwood at the time he asked her to tide him over vanished with these newer urgings of decency. He was not always renewing his request, but this love of good appearance was. It insisted, and Carrie wished to satisfy it, wished more and more that Hurstwood was not in the way. Hurstwood reasoned, when he neared the last $10, that he had better keep a little pocket change, and not become wholly dependent for car fare, shaves, and the like. So when this sum was still in his hand, he announced himself as penniless. "I'm clear out," he said to Carrie one afternoon. "I paid for some coal this morning, and that took all but 10 or 15 cents. I've got some money there in my purse." Hurstwood went to get it, starting for a can of tomatoes. Carrie scarcely noticed that this was the beginning of the new order. He took out 15 cents and bought the can with it. Thereafter it was dribs and drabs of this sort, until one morning Carrie suddenly remembered that she would not be back until close to dinner time. "We're all out of flour," she said. "You better get some this afternoon. We haven't any meat either. How would it do if we had liver and bacon?" "Suits me," said Hurstwood. "Better get half or 3/4 of a pound of that." "Half will be enough," volunteered Hurstwood. She opened her purse and laid down a $half. He pretended not to notice it. Hurstwood bought the flour, which all grocers sold in 3.5-pound packages, for 13 cents and paid 15 cents for a half-pound of liver and bacon. He left the packages, together with the balance of 32 cents, upon the kitchen table where Carrie found it. It did not escape her that the change was accurate. There was something sad in realizing that, after all that he wanted out of her was something to eat. She felt as if hard thoughts were unjust. Maybe he would get something yet. He had no vices. That very evening, however, on going into the theater, one of the chorus girls passed her, all newly arrayed in a pretty mottled tweed suit, which took Carrie's eye. The young woman wore a fine bunch of violets and seemed in high spirits. She smiled at Carrie good-naturedly as she passed, showing pretty, even teeth, and Carrie smiled back. She can afford to dress well, thought Carrie, and so could I if I could only keep my money. I haven't a decent tie of any kind to wear. She put out her foot and looked at her shoe reflectively. "I'll get a pair of shoes Saturday, anyhow. I don't care what happens." One of the sweetest and most sympathetic little chorus girls in the company made friends with her, because in Carrie she found nothing to frighten her away. She was a gay little Manon, unwitting of society's fierce conception of morality, but nevertheless good to her neighbor and charitable. Little license was allowed the chorus in the matter of conversation, but nevertheless some was indulged in. "It's warm tonight, isn't it?" said this girl, arrayed in pink fleshings and an imitation golden helmet. She also carried a shining shield. "Yes, it is," said Carrie, pleased that someone should talk to her. "I'm almost roasting," said the girl. Carrie looked into her pretty face with its large blue eyes and saw little beads of moisture. "There's more marching in this opera than ever I did before," added the girl. "Have you been in others?" asked Carrie, surprised at her experience. "Lots of them," said the girl. "Haven't you?" "This is my first experience." "Oh, is it? I thought I saw you the time they ran the Queen's Maid here." "No," said Carrie, shaking her head. "Not me." This conversation was interrupted by the blare of the orchestra and the sputtering of the calcium lights in the wings as the line was called to form for a new entrance. No further opportunity for conversation occurred, but the next evening, when they were getting ready for the stage, this girl appeared anew at her side. "They say this show is going on the road next month." "Is it?" said Carrie. "Yes. Do you think you'll go?" "I don't know. I guess so if they'll take me." "Oh, they'll take you." "I wouldn't go. They won't give you any more, and it'll cost you everything to make live. I never leave New York. There are too many shows going on here." "Can you always get in another show?" "I always have. There's one going on up at the Broadway this month. I'm going to try and get in that if this one really goes." Carrie heard this with aroused intelligence. Evidently, it wasn't so very difficult to get on. Maybe she could also get a place if this show went away. "Do they all pay about the same?" she asked. "Yes. Sometimes you get a little more. This show doesn't pay very much." "I get 12, said Carrie. "Do you?" said the girl. "They pay me 15, and you do more work than I do. I wouldn't stand it if I were you. They're just giving you less because they think you don't know. You ought to be making 15. "Well, I'm not," said Carrie. "Well, you'll get more at the next place if you want it," went on the girl, who admired Carrie very much. "You do fine, and the manager knows it." To say the truth, Carrie did not unconsciously move about with an air pleasing and somewhat distinctive. It was due wholly to her natural manner and total lack of self-consciousness. "Do you suppose I could get more up at the Broadway?" "Of course you can," answered the girl. "You come with me when I go. I'll do the talking." Carrie heard this, flushing with thankfulness. She liked this little gaslight soldier. She seemed so experienced and self-reliant in her tinsel helmet and military accoutrement. "My future must be assured if I can always get work this way," thought Carrie. Still, in the morning when her household duties would infringe upon her and Hurstwood sat there, a perfect load to contemplate, her fate seemed dismal and unrelieved. It did not take so very much to feed them under Hurstwood's close-measured buying, and there would possibly be enough for rent, but it left nothing else. Carrie bought the shoes and some other things, which complicated the rent problem very seriously. Suddenly, a week from the fatal day, Carrie realized that they were going to run short. "I don't believe," she exclaimed, looking into her purse at breakfast, "that I'll have enough to pay the rent." "How much have you?" inquired Hurstwood. "Well, I've got $22, but there's everything to be paid for this week yet. And if I use all I get Saturday to pay this, there won't be any left for next week." "Do you think your hotel man will open his hotel this month?" "I think so," returned Hurstwood. "He said he would." After a while, Hurstwood said, "Don't worry about it. Maybe the grocer will wait. He can do that. We've traded there long enough to make him trust us for a week or two." "Do you think he will?" she asked. "I think so." On this account, Hurstwood, this very day, looked Grocer Ocelage clearly in the eye as he ordered a pound of coffee and said, "Do you mind carrying my account until the end of every week?" "No, no, Mr. Wheeler," said Mr. Ocelage. "That is all right." Hurstwood, still tactful in distress, added nothing to this. It seemed an easy thing. He looked out of the door and then gathered up his coffee when ready and came away. The game of a desperate man had begun. Rent was paid, and now came the grocer. Hurstwood managed by paying out of his own 10 and collecting from Carrie at the end of the week. Then he delayed a day, next time settling with the grocer, and so soon had his 10 back, with Ocelog getting his pay on this Thursday or Friday for last Saturday's bill. This entanglement made Carrie anxious for a change of some sort. Hurstwood did not seem to realize that she had a right to anything. He schemed to make what she earned cover all expenses, but seemed not to trouble over adding anything himself. "He talks about worrying," thought Carrie. If he worried enough, he couldn't sit there and wait for me. He'd get something to do. No man could go 7 months without finding something if he tried. The sight of him always around, in his untidy clothes and gloomy appearance, drove Carrie to seek relief in other places. Twice a week there were matinees, and then Hurstwood ate a cold snack which he prepared himself. 2 other days there were rehearsals beginning at 10 in the morning and lasting usually until 1. Now, to this Carrie added a few visits to 1 or 2 chorus girls, including the blue-eyed soldier of the golden helmet. She did it because it was pleasant and a relief from dullness of the home over which her husband brooded. The blue-eyed soldier's name was Osborne, Lola Osborne. Her room was in 19th Street near 4th Avenue, a block now given up wholly to office buildings. Here she had a comfortable back room, looking over a collection of backyards in which grew a number of shade trees pleasant to see. "Isn't your home in New York?" she asked of Lola one day. "Yes, but I can't get along with my people. They always want me to do what they want." "Do you live here?" "Yes," said Carrie. "With your family?" Carrie was ashamed to say that she was married. She had talked so much about getting more salary and confessed to so much anxiety about her future that now, when the direct question of fact was waiting, she could not tell this girl. "With some relatives," she answered. Miss Osborne took it for granted that, like herself, Carrie's time was her own. She invariably asked her to stay, proposing little outings and other things of that sort, until Carrie began neglecting her dinner hours. Hurstwood noticed it, but felt in no position to quarrel with her. Several times she came so late as scarcely to have an hour in which to patch up a meal and start for the theater. Do you rehearse in the afternoon?" Hurstwood once asked, concealing almost completely the cynical protest and regret which prompted it. "No, I was looking around for another place," said Carrie. As a matter of fact, she was, but only in such a way as furnished the least straw of an excuse. Miss Osborne and she had gone to the office of the manager who was to produce the new opera at the Broadway, and returned straight to the former's room where they had been since 3 o'clock. Carrie felt this question to be an infringement on her liberty. She did not take into account how much liberty she was securing. Only the last step, the newest freedom, must not be questioned. Hurstwood saw it all clearly enough. He was shrewd after his kind, and yet there was enough decency in the man to stop him from making an effectual protest. In his almost inexplicable apathy, he was content to droop supinely while Carrie drifted out of his life, just as he was willing supinely to see opportunity pass beyond his control. He could not help clinging and protesting in a mild, irritating, and ineffectual way, however, a way that simply widened the breach by slow degrees. A further enlargement of this chasm between them came when the manager, looking between the wings upon the brightly lighted stage where the chorus was going through some of its glittering evolutions, said to the master of the ballet, "Who is that 4th girl there on the right, the one coming round at the end now?" "Oh," said the ballet master, "that's Miss Medenda. She's good-looking. Why don't you let her lead in that line?" "I will," said the man. "Just do that. She'll look better there than the woman you've got." "All right, I will do that," said the master. The next evening, Carrie was called out, much as if for an error. "You lead your company tonight," said the master. "Yes, sir," said Carrie. "Put Snap into it," he added. "We must have Snap." "Yes, sir," replied Carrie. Astonished at this change, she thought that the heretofore leader must be ill. But when she saw her in the line with a distinct expression of something unfavorable in her eye, she began to think that perhaps it was merit. She had a chic way of tossing her head to one side and holding her arms as if for action, not listlessly. In front of the line, this showed up even more effectually. "That girl knows how to carry herself," said the manager another evening. He began to think that he should like to talk with her. If he hadn't made it a rule to have nothing to do with the members of the chorus, he would have approached her most unbendingly. Put that girl at the head of the white column, he suggested to the man in charge of the ballet. This white column consisted of some 20 girls, all in snow-white flannel trimmed with silver and blue. Its leader was most stunningly arrayed in the same colors, elaborated, however, with epaulets and a belt of silver, with a short sword dangling at one side. Carrie was fitted for this costume, and a few days later appeared, proud of her new laurels. She was especially gratified to find that her salary was now 18 instead of 12. Hurstwood heard nothing about this. I'll not give him the rest of my money, said Carrie. I do enough. I'm going to get me something to wear. As a matter of fact, during this second month, she had been buying for herself as recklessly as she dared, regardless of the consequences. There were impending more complications rent day, and more extension of the credit system in the neighborhood. Now, however, she proposed to do better by herself. Her first move was to buy a shirtwaist, and in studying these, she found how little her money would buy. How much if she could only use all. She forgot if she were alone, she would have to pay for a room and board, and imagined that every cent of her 18 could be spent for clothes and things that she liked. At last, she picked upon something which not only used up all her surplus above 12, but invaded that sum. She knew she was going too far, but her feminine love of finery prevailed. The next day, Hurstwood said, We owe the grocer $5.40 this week. Do we? Said Carrie, frowning a little. She looked in her purse to leave it. I've only got $18.20 altogether. We owe the milkman 60 cents, added Hurstwood. Yes, and there's the coalman, said Carrie. Hurstwood said nothing. He had seen the new things she was buying, the way she was neglecting household duties, the readiness with which she was slipping out afternoons and staying. He felt that something was going to happen. All at once she spoke. I don't know, she said. I can't do it all. I don't earn enough. This was a direct challenge. Hurstwood had to take it up. He tried to be calm. I don't want you to do it all, he said. I only want a little help until I can get something to do. Oh, yes, answered Carrie. That's always the way. It takes more than I can earn to pay for things. I don't see what I'm going to do. Well, I've tried to get something, he exclaimed. What do you want me to do? You couldn't have tried so very hard, said Carrie. I got something. Well, I did, he said, angered almost to harsh words. You needn't throw up your success to me. All I asked was a little help until I could get something. I'm not down yet. I'll come up all right. He tried to speak steadily, but his voice trembled a little. Carrie's anger melted on the instant. She felt ashamed. Well, she said, here's the money, and emptied it out on the table. I haven't got quite enough to pay it all. If they can wait until Saturday, though, I'll have some more. You keep it, said Hurstwood sadly. I only want enough to pay the grocer. She put it back and proceeded to get dinner early and in good time. Her little bravado made her feel as if she ought to make amends. In a little while, their old thoughts returned to both. She's making more than she says, thought Hurstwood. She says she's making 12, but that wouldn't buy all those things. I don't care. Let her keep the money. I'll get something again one of these days. Then she could go to the deuce. He only said this in his anger, but it prefigured a possible course of action and attitude well enough. I don't care, thought Carrie. He ought to be told to get out and do something. It isn't right that I should support him. In these days, Carrie was introduced to several youths, friends of Miss Osborne, who were of the kind most aptly described as gay and festive. They called once to get Miss Osborne for an afternoon drive. Carrie was with her at the time. Come and go along, said Lola. No, I can't, said Carrie. Oh, yes, come and go. What have you got to do? I have to be home by 5, said Carrie. What for? Oh, dinner. They'll take us to dinner, said Lola. No, said Carrie. I won't go. I can't. Oh, do come. They're awful nice boys. We'll get you back in time. We're only going for a drive in Central Park. Carrie thought a while and at last yielded. Now, I must be back by 4:30, she said. The information went in one ear of Lola and out the other. After Drury and Hurstwood, there was the least touch of cynicism in her attitude toward young men, especially of the gay and frivolous sort. She felt a little older than they. Some of their pretty compliments seemed silly. Still, she was young in heart and body, and youth appealed to her. Oh, we'll be right back, Miss Medenda, said one of the chaps, bowing. You wouldn't think we'd keep you overtime now, would you? Well, I don't know, said Carrie, smiling. They were off for a drive. She, looking about and noticing fine clothing, the young men voicing those silly pleasantries and weak quips which pass for humor in coy circles. Carrie saw the great park parade of carriages beginning at the 59th Street entrance and winding past the Museum of Art to the exit at 110th Street and 7th Avenue. Her eye was once more taken by the show of wealth, the elaborate costumes, elegant harnesses, spirited horses, and above all, the beauty. Once more the plague of poverty galled her, but now she forgot in a measure her own troubles, so far as to forget Hurstwood. He waited until 4, 5, and even 6. It was getting dark when he got up out of his chair. I guess she isn't coming home, he said grimly. That's the way, he thought. She's getting a start now. I'm out of it. Carrie had really discovered her neglect, but only at 5:15, and the open carriage was now far up 7th Avenue near the Harlem River. What time is it? She inquired. I must be getting back. 5:15, said her companion, consulting an elegant open-faced watch. Oh, dear me, exclaimed Carrie, and she settled back with a sigh. There's no use crying over spilt milk, she said. It's too late. Of course it is, said the youth, who saw visions of a fine dinner now, and such invigorating talk as would result in a reunion after the show. He was greatly taken with Carrie. We'll drive down to Delmonico's now and have something there, won't we, Orrin? To be sure, replied Orrin gaily. Carrie thought of Hurstwood. Never before had she neglected dinner without an excuse. They drove back, and at 6:15 sat down to dine. It was the sherry incident over again, the remembrance of which came painfully back to Carrie. She remembered Mrs. Vance, who had never called again after Hurstwood's reception in Ames. At this figure, her mind halted. It was a strong, clean vision. He liked better books than she read, better people than she associated with. His ideals burned in her heart. It's fine to be a good actress came distinctly back. What sort of an actress was she? What are you thinking about, Miss Medenda? Inquired her merry companion. Come, now, let's see if I can guess. Oh, no, said Carrie, don't try. She shook it off and ate. She forgot, in part, and was merry. When it came to the after-theater proposition, however, she shook her head. No, she said, I can't. I have a previous engagement. Oh, now, Miss Medenda, pleaded the youth. No, said Carrie, I can't. You've been so kind, but you'll have to excuse me. The youth looked exceedingly crestfallen. Cheer up, old man, whispered his companion. We'll go around anyhow. She may change her mind. Chapter 40. A public dissension, a final appeal. There was no after-theater lark, however, so far as Carrie was concerned. She made her way homeward, thinking about her absence. Hurstwood was asleep, but roused up to look as she passed through to her own bed. Is that you? He said. Yes, she answered. The next morning at breakfast, she felt like apologizing. I couldn't get home last evening, she said. Carrie, he answered. What's the use saying that? I don't care. You needn't tell me that, though. I couldn't, said Carrie, her color rising. Then, seeing that he looked as if he said, I know, she exclaimed, Oh, all right. I don't care. From now on, her indifference to the flat was even greater. There seemed no common ground on which they could talk to one another. She let herself be asked for expenses. It became so with him that he hated to do it. He preferred standing off the butcher and baker. He ran up a grocery bill of $16 with Oslog, laying in a supply of staple articles so that they would not have to buy any of those things for some time to come. Then he changed his grocery. It was the same with the butcher and several others. Carrie never heard anything of this directly from him. He asked for such as he could expect, drifting farther and farther into a situation which could have but one ending. In this fashion, September went by. Isn't Mr. Drake going to open his hotel? Carrie asked several times. Yes, he won't do it before October, though now. Carrie became disgusted. Such a man, she said to herself frequently. More and more she visited. She put most of her spare money in clothes, which, after all, was not an astonishing amount. At last, the opera she was with announced its departure within 4 weeks. Last 2 weeks of the great comic opera success, the etc., was upon all billboards and in the newspapers before she acted. I'm not going out on the road, said Miss Osborne. Carrie went with her to apply to another manager. Ever had any experience? Was one of his questions. I'm with the company at the casino now. Oh, you are, he said. The end of this was another engagement at 20 per week. Carrie was delighted. She began to feel that she had a place in the world. People recognized ability. So changed was her state that the home atmosphere became intolerable. It was all poverty and trouble there, or seemed to be, because it was a load to bear. It became a place to keep away from. Still, she slept there and did a fair amount of work keeping it in order. It was a sitting place for Hurstwood. He sat and rocked and read, enveloped in the gloom of his own fate. October went by, and November. It was the dead of winter almost before he knew it, and there he sat. Carrie was doing better, that he knew. Her clothes were improved now, even fine. He saw her coming and going, sometimes picturing to himself her rise. Little eating had thinned him somewhat. He had no appetite. His clothes, too, were a poor man's clothes. Talk about getting something had become even too threadbare and ridiculous for him. So he folded his hands and waited. For what, he could not anticipate. At last, however, troubles became too thick. The hounding of creditors, the indifference of Carrie, the silence of the flat, and presence of winter all joined to produce a climax. It was effected by the arrival of Ocelot personally when Carrie was there. I call about my bill, said Mr. Ocelot. Carrie was only faintly surprised. How much is it? She asked. $16, he replied. Oh, that much? Said Carrie. Is this right? She asked, turning to Hurstwood. Yes, he said. Well, I never heard anything about it. She looked as if she thought he had been contracting some needless expense. Well, we had it all right, he answered. Then he went to the door. I can't pay you anything on that today, he said mildly. Well, when can you? Said the grocer. Not before Saturday, anyhow, said Hurstwood. Huh, returned the grocer. This is fine. I must have that. I need the money. Carrie was standing farther back in the room, hearing it all. She was greatly distressed. It was so bad and commonplace. Hurstwood was annoyed also. Well, he said, there's no use talking about it now. If you'll come in Saturday, I'll pay you something on it. The grocery man went away. How are we going to pay it? Asked Carrie, astonished by the bill. I can't do it. Well, you don't have to, he said. He can't get what he can't get. He'll have to wait. I don't see how we ran up such a bill as that, said Carrie. Well, we ate it, said Hurstwood. It's funny, she replied, still doubting. What's the use of your standing there and talking like that now? He asked. Do you think I've had it alone? You talk as if I'd taken something. Well, it's too much anyhow, said Carrie. I oughtn't to be made to pay for it. I've got more than I can pay for now. All right, replied Hurstwood, sitting down in silence. He was sick of the grind of this thing. Carrie went out, and there he sat, determining to do something. There had been appearing in the papers about this time rumors and notices of an approaching strike on the trolley lines in Brooklyn. There was a general dissatisfaction as to the hours of labor required and the wages paid. As usual, and for some inexplicable reason, the men chose the winter for their forcing of the hand of their employers and the settlement of their difficulties. Hurstwood had been reading of this thing and wondering concerning the huge tie-up which would follow. A day or two before this trouble with Carrie, it came. On a cold afternoon when everything was gray and it threatened to snow, the papers announced that the men had been called out on all the lines. Being so utterly idle, and his mind filled with the numerous predictions which had been made concerning the scarcity of labor this winter and the panicky state of the financial market, Hurstwood read this with interest. He noted the claims of the striking motormen and conductors, who said that they had been wont to receive $2 a day in times past, but that for a year or more trippers had been introduced, which cut down their chance of livelihood one half and increased their hours of servitude from 10 to 12, and even 14. These trippers were men put on during the busy and rush hours to take a car out for one trip. The compensation paid for such a trip was only 25 cents. When the rush or busy hours were over, they were laid off. Worst of all, no man might know when he was going to get a car. He must come to the barns in the morning and wait around in fair and foul weather until such a time as he was needed. 2 trips were an average reward for so much waiting, a little over 3 hours' work for 50 cents. The work of waiting was not counted. The men complained that this system was extending, and that the time was not far off when but a few out of 7,000 employees would have regular $2 a day work at all. They demanded that the system be abolished and that 10 hours be considered a day's work, barring unavoidable delays with $2.25 pay. They demanded immediate acceptance of these terms, which the various trolley companies refused. Hurstwood at first sympathized with the demands of these men. Indeed, it is a question whether he did not always sympathize with them to the end, belie him as his actions might. Reading nearly all the news, he was attracted first by the scareheads with which trouble was noted in the world. He read it fully, the names of the 7 companies involved, the number of men. They're foolish to strike in this sort of weather, he thought to himself. Let 'em win if they can, though. The next day there was even a larger notice of it. Brooklynites walk, said the world. Knights of labor tie up the trolley lines across the bridge. About 7,000 men out. Hurstwood read this, formulating to himself his own idea of what would be the outcome. He was a great believer in the strength of corporations. They can't win, he said, concerning the men. They haven't any money. The police will protect the companies. They've got to. The public has to have its cars. He didn't sympathize with the corporations, but strength was with them. So was property and public utility. Those fellows can't win, he thought. Among other things, he noticed a circular issued by one of the companies which read, Atlantic Avenue Railroad. Special notice. The motormen and conductors and other employees of this company have abruptly left its service, An opportunity is now given to all loyal men who have struck against their will to be reinstated, providing they will make their applications by 12 o'clock noon on Wednesday, January the 16th. Such men will be given employment with guaranteed protection and the order in which such applications are received, and runs and positions assigned to them accordingly. Otherwise, they will be considered discharged, and every vacancy will be filled by a new man as soon as his services can be secured. Signed, Benjamin Norton, President. He also noted among the want ads one which read, Wanted, 50 skilled motormen accustomed to Westinghouse system to run U.S. mail cars only in the city of Brooklyn. Protection guaranteed. He noticed particularly in each the protection guaranteed. It signified to him the unassailable power of the companies. They've got the militia on their side, he thought. There isn't anything those men can do. While this was still in his mind, the incident with Ostdog and Carrie occurred. There had been a good deal to irritate him, but this seemed much the worst. Never before had she accused him of stealing, or very near that. She doubted the naturalness of so large a bill. And he had worked so hard to make expenses seem light. He had been doing the butcher and baker in order not to call on her. He had eaten very little, almost nothing. Damn it all, he said. I can get something. I'm not down yet. He thought that he really must do something now. It was too cheap to sit around after such an insinuation as this. Why, after a little, he would be standing anything. He got up and looked out the window into the chilly street. It came gradually into his mind as he stood there to go to Brooklyn. Why not? His mind said. Anyone can get work over there. You'll get 2 a day. How about accidents? Said a voice. You might get hurt. Well, there won't be much of that, he answered. They've called out the police. Anyone who wants to run a car will be protected all right. You don't know how to run a car, rejoined the voice. I won't apply as a motorman, he answered. I can ring up fares all right. They'll want motormen mostly. They'll take anybody, that I know. For several hours he argued pro and con with this mental counselor, feeling no need to act at once in a matter so sure of profit. In the morning he put on his best clothes, which were poor enough, and began stirring about, putting some bread and meat into a page of a newspaper. Carrie watched him, interested in this new move. Where are you going? She asked. Over to Brooklyn, he answered. Then seeing her still inquisitive, he added, I think I can get on over there. On the trolley lines? Said Carrie, astonished. Yes, he rejoined. Aren't you afraid? She asked. What of? He answered. The police are protecting them. The paper said 4 men were hurt yesterday. Yes, he returned, but you can't go by what the papers say. They'll run the cars all right. He looked rather determined now in a desolate sort of way, and Carrie felt very sorry. Something of the old Hurstwood was here, the least shadow of what was once shrewd and pleasant strength. Outside, it was cloudy and blowing a few flakes of snow. What a day to go over there, thought Carrie. Now he left before she did, which was a remarkable thing, and it tramped eastward to 14th Street and 6th Avenue, where he took the car. He had read that scores of applicants were applying at the office of the Brooklyn City Railroad building and were being received. He made his way there by horse car and ferry, a dark, silent man, to the offices in question. It was a long way, for no cars were running and the day was cold, but he trudged along grimly. Once in Brooklyn, he could clearly see and feel that a strike was on. People showed it in their manner. Along the routes of certain tracks, not a car was running. About certain corners and nearby saloons, small groups of men were lounging. Several spring wagons passed him, equipped with plain wooden chairs and labeled Flatbush or Prospect Park fare, 10 cents. He noticed cold and even gloomy faces. Labor was having its little war. When he came near the office in question, he saw a few men standing about and some policemen. On the far corners were other men, whom he took to be strikers, watching. All the houses were small and wooden, the streets poorly paved. After New York, Brooklyn looked actually poor and hard up. He made his way into the heart of the small group, eyed by policemen, and the men were already there. One of the officers addressed him. "What are you looking for?" "I want to see if I can get a place." "The offices are up those steps," said the blue coat. His face was a very neutral thing to contemplate. In his heart of hearts, he sympathized with the strikers and hated this scab. In his heart of hearts, also, he felt the dignity and use of the police force, which commanded order. Of its true social significance, he never once dreamed. He was not the mind for that. The two feelings blended in him, neutralized one another and him. He would have fought for this man as determinedly as for himself, and yet only so far as commanded. Strip him of his uniform, and he would have soon picked his side. Hurstwood ascended a dusty flight of steps and entered a small, dust-colored office, in which were a railing, a long desk, and several clerks. "Well, sir," said a middle-aged man, looking up at him from the long desk. "Do you want to hire any men?" inquired Hurstwood. "What are you, a motorman?" "No, I'm not anything," said Hurstwood. He was not at all abashed by his position. He knew these people needed men. If one didn't take him, another would. This man could take him or leave him just as he chose. "Well, we prefer experienced men, of course," said the man. He paused, while Hurstwood smiled indifferently. Then he added, "Still, I guess you can learn. What is your name?" "Wheeler," said Hurstwood. The man wrote an order on a small card. "Take that to our barns," he said, "and give it to the foreman. He'll show you what to do." Hurstwood went down and out. He walked straight away in the direction indicated while the policeman looked after. "There's another wants to try it," said Officer Keeley to Officer Macy. "I have my mind he'll get his fill," returned the latter quietly. They had been in strikes before.